Thank you for coming tonight. I'd like to introduce to you Sean Craig, who's the president of the El Dorado Progressives.
Thanks everyone for coming tonight. It's nice to see a full house, and this being the first forum here in El Dorado County, so thanks for coming out on a cool and rainy night.
My name is Lori Anzini, and I'm the chair of the El Dorado Democratic Party. Welcome to the co-sponsored El Dorado County Democrats and the El Dorado Progressives Forum. We appreciate that you have taken your time to spend a few hours with us to learn about the candidates and the issues. Our representation in Washington, D.C. is more important now than ever. Anyone who decides to run for an elected position, be it locally, state, or federally, is taking on an extreme level of sacrifice. Not only the time commitment, but the personal time away from families and friends. Anyone who endeavors in this adventure must be admired for their sacrifice. Along with this challenge, these candidates here are taking on criticism, scrutiny, and a level of publicity that we, the voters, expect to help us evaluate the candidates. Since mid-March, the El Dorado County Democratic Party Candidate Development Committee has interviewed 8 candidates running for this position. As of last week, there were 5 people who had filed official papers with the FEC as candidates in the Congressional 4th District race. 2 of those candidates have officially suspended their campaigns. Tonight, you will hear from the 3 remaining candidates. Please note that the El Dorado County Democratic Central Committee sponsorship of this forum, along with the El Dorado Progressives, is not an endorsement of these candidates.
El Dorado Progressives is an expressly nonpartisan organization. However, we are very interested in finding, developing, and supporting candidates at all levels of government that support our core values of freedom, opportunity, responsibility, and cooperation. It's for that reason that we're collaborating with El Dorado County Democrats to bring you this forum tonight. We thank you for coming and welcome all viewers on the El Dorado Progressives YouTube channel and Channel 2 Sierra Community Access Television. And now the rules. All the candidates here on the stage have been given an advanced set of questions that were created by a joint committee of El Dorado County Democratic Party and El Dorado Progressives. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to introduce themselves and make key points to the audience. The moderators will ask each candidate the same question, and each one will have 2 minutes to respond. A timer is on the floor, and candidates should stop when the bright pink card is held high, as it is right now. 5 additional questions will be taken from you, the audience. Please fill out a postcard and submit your question to the volunteers walking around the room. We will review and select the 5 questions that best address issues not in the original 8 questions, and that will illuminate who these candidates are and what they believe. At the end of the forum, each candidate will have 2 minutes for their closing statements.
So it's time to get started. Rosa Calderon is the first up for her opening statement.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Rosa Calderon and I'm running for Congress in California's 4th District against Tom McClintock. Tom McClintock, as you recall, is the same person that earlier this year ran away from his constituents by calling us radicals and anarchists. This is the same man who praised the Tea Party when they were advocating for the same type of representation that we are today. This is also the same man who has only been able to name 2 post offices and give 1 land grant of 41 acres to one of his biggest supporters, Red Hawk Casino. Our district is enormous. It encompasses the beauty of Lake Tahoe, the majestic sequoias, the ridges of Kings Canyon, and it also has the crown jewel of our national park system, Yosemite. In these foothills, across the Sierra Nevada, and into the Central Valley, where our farm workers have become the backbone of this nation, we have people who are honest, hardworking, and law-abiding citizens for whom the American dream has failed. I am here standing with you today because we are in the center of a political revolution and we cannot afford to sit this one out any longer. I'm standing here because as a refugee from El Salvador, where my mother almost lost her life to get us here, to give us and provide us a better opportunity, we have struggled and we see that the American dream is becoming dimmer and dimmer every single day. I'm also standing here because I want to fight for the heart of this nation. And the heart of this nation is the people. And what we have seen over time, that idea that if you work hard and if you do everything right, that at the end of your life you will have a fruit of your labor and you will be able to retire and life will be grand. But what we really are experiencing is growing income inequality and a government that only represents the top 1% and corporations. The representation that used to be there to fight for our interests is no longer there. So I ask you today to join me in this fight, not just in the resistance, because we are no longer victims, but I ask you to join me in organizing. I ask you to join me in getting out and registering voters. I ask you to join me to help me run so that people can come out and vote and that we can actually win. I'm asking you all of these things because I believe that our district is ready to be represented by one of us. I grew up in this district. I grew up in Lincoln most of my life. I went to Lincoln High School. I was able to enter the labor market and go straight into the housing market that we were a part of. But equally, I had to reinvent myself quickly when the recession hit. And because of that, I went back to school, by then divorced and a single parent, and was able to finish my 4 degrees in under 3 years. Because of the hardships that I've experienced in this area, I want to make sure that we can progress our community, and that's what I'm here to do, is to fight for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next is Regina Bateson.
Thank you so much. I'll stay back here. Seems like I was a little bit too excited there. All right, but I want to start with a question for all of you. Who's ready to beat Tom McClintock next year? Now, you're a pretty feisty crowd. I can tell that already. But that wasn't good enough. Because Tom McClintock, he lives all the way down Highway 50 in Elk Grove. It's really far. So let's try that again. Who's ready to beat Tom McClintock next year? All right, that's more like it. I'm Regina Bateson, and I'm from Roseville. I grew up right here in our district. I'm a proud graduate of our public schools, and I'm so honored to have many members of my family and even some of my former teachers here tonight with us. But I want to start reflecting a little bit, thinking about what was happening for my family and probably yours 1 year ago tonight, which was the 2016 election. On that night, I was watching the election results in our living room, holding my 2 twin boys in my arms, and I looked down at them, and I realized that their future was going to be so different than what we had hoped for them, because they were going to be growing up in a world now where bullying is the norm, and that's our model of leadership. And I decided right then and there that that's unacceptable, and that it was my moral obligation as a parent and as a citizen to stand up and do something, to stand up for our values. And that's how I ended up here tonight, 1 year later, running for Congress against Tom McClintock. There is so much at stake in our district. It's about time we had a real representative, because I think that people here, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they value hard work. And I know the value of hard work. At one point, I actually had 3 jobs at the same time. I always say that if you ever passed through Roseville in the 1990s, there's a good chance I served you at some point. Either ice cream or bagels or sandwiches. I even sold clothes at the Gap for a while. But I think that if we take a hard look, right now we're becoming a society that doesn't value hard work, that doesn't value its dignity. Because if someone is working hard 40 hours a week, they should be able to afford housing in the community where they live. They should have access to affordable health care. If someone has worked hard their entire life, they should have a secure retirement. Tom McClintock's votes in Congress are jeopardizing all of those values that we hold dear. So I'm running for Congress to fight for opportunity and to fight for the promise of our region. This is the region where gold was discovered. This has always been a place where people come to find their futures, to build better lives for themselves and their families. I've had tremendous opportunities because of the investments that our community has made in me through our public schools. I was able to go off to college at Stanford. When I graduated shortly after 9/11, I joined the Foreign Service and I worked on border security in Washington, D.C. and in Latin America because I speak Spanish fluently. Then I went back to school with a scholarship, I got a PhD, and I became a tenure-track professor. But I've stepped away from that all right now to take on Tom McClintock because I want to be a real voice for our region. Please join me. Thank you.
Jessica Morse will now present her opening statement.
A year ago this night, I was at a polling center, helping voters stay in line, ensuring everyone voted. It was a culminating moment of months and months of work. I was so proud of all of my volunteers who had knocked on tens of thousands of doors and made hundreds of thousands of phone calls like many of you, because we thought we were ushering in a new moment in history. But when I turned on the news that night, I realized it was a different moment in history. America had just voted in the Trump era. And like many of you, I was overcome with an initial wave of grief. But when that grief subsided, I felt a fire inside of me, as if I was being made into steel. You know, I'd spent my entire career in public service in some of the toughest places around the world. I worked for USAID, the Defense Department, the State Department, in Burma and Ethiopia, Nepal, and including a year and a half in Baghdad, serving on the front lines with our troops. And I realized what was at stake with our country. In my entire career, I'd always thought about coming home and serving my community by running for office. But last year I thought, how can I run in this environment when you step up to run, your record is distorted, whisper campaigns start against you, and your good work is undermined. But I got my answer at Thanksgiving. I had Thanksgiving last year at my aunt's, and her brother-in-law was coming, who was the head of the Trump campaign in Colorado. And so, rather than making it awkward for all of us, I called him up and I said, how can I run for office in this environment? And he was an experienced politician. And he said, Jessica, you have to run. He said, unless enough people with real integrity step up and run for office, this political culture is never going to change. This gotcha politics, this nastiness, it's not going to change. He said, he told me it's going to be like running into a burning building, but you have to do it. And I realized, I thought, you know what, I am tough enough to do this. I survived a year and a half in Baghdad. I was shot at, nearly kidnapped, had a plane that was nearly shot down. Politics can't be that hard. And you know, I hiked 500 miles on the Pacific Crest Trail, the entire length of our gorgeous district by foot, which Tom McClintock cannot claim. And I realized I could do this. And I knew what the stakes were. You know, I joined the presidential campaign last year because I was afraid Trump was going to tweet us into World War III. And when McClintock came out in lockstep with Trump, I said, this is not good enough for my community. And I decided it is time to step up and serve and run. Last night, we all cheered as Virginia demonstrated that hard work, heart, and real organization and resources can actually make a difference in any district. And guess what? That heart, that energy, that's what we have here. All of you have stepped up and come out tonight because you are answering this call, and it is my honor to stand on the front lines of this moment in history with you, because tonight is the night we win. Thank you.
So we're going to move on to the 8 selected questions that was formed by the Joint Committee. And I'm going to ask everybody to hold their applause as each one of the candidates answers their questions in 2 minutes. The first question is for Rosa, then Jessica and Regina. So Rosa first, and I will read the question. For working families in CD4, there are 3 basic job issues: unemployment in certain parts of CD4, underemployment, and wage levels, wage inequality. What will you do to address these issues?
Okay, so what we saw this year in 2017 Our district encompasses 10 counties. Every single one of these counties welcomed the new year with unemployment rates higher than the national average. 2 of our counties, Madera and Fresno, welcomed the new year with unemployment rates higher than 10%. That is atrocious. And this is one of those districts that we also share with Devin Nunes. So we definitely know that our representatives on the GOP are not doing much about job issues today. One announcement that the Trump administration made earlier this year in June was that there was 300,000 jobs vacant in the United States, and we had no labor market to actually fill those positions. Every single one of those jobs was within the tech industry. So we have to really start investing in retraining our employees and stop trying to pursue this idea that we will bring back jobs in coal, oil, and gas. Because we need to really start working towards new economies, training programs. As a concerned citizen in my area, one of the projects that I was working on and staffing for was the high-speed rail here in California. And one of the things that I realized was that women over 40 who were re-entering the labor market were being passed up for positions that they were extremely qualified for. But because they weren't savvy on either Office, Excel, or any type of programming or GIS software, they were passed up for these positions. So I started a volunteer group locally with a few engineers and a few retired business professionals in the area, and we started a group called Lab 40. Lab 40 is just a volunteer group, and what we do is we spend our time retraining women in tech programs, even programming and coding actually, to go back into those markets. But that's exactly what we have to invest in, is schooling, training programs, vocational programs, and making sure that we are prepared for the future markets.
And Jessica.
We have an unemployment rate in our district of about 5%, but we have an underemployment rate in our entire state of about 12%. That's about 40,000 people who were discouraged and stopped looking for work in our district. Now, we need to be able to revitalize our economy. We need to be able to have our kids who graduate from high school here or college be able to actually stay and find jobs in the community that they love. But that's not happening right now. So how do we get there? First, we need to turn the environmental challenges that we're having in our district into real job opportunities. The 120 million dead trees in our Sierras from beetle kill, we need to turn those into cottage industries making furniture from the trees in our neighborhoods. We need to turn that into biomass plants and turn those into renewable energy. Fire is a huge hazard in our district. CAL FIRE has the capacity to hire more and more people doing fire prevention and forest health restoration. A small investment into those programs will turn into jobs and make our communities safer. We also need to be investing in vocational training so that people are trained for the jobs that our businesses demand in our community. Now, Tom McClintock, unfortunately, voted against the Department of Labor funding and Department of Education funding. There were real ramifications in our district. Calaveras County had to cut vocational training programs that were demanded by the local businesses because of this funding cut. Sonora actually cut its ROTC program with CAL FIRE because of McClintock's funding cuts on Department of Education. Finally, we need access to rural broadband. Our economy will never improve until everyone is connected to the modern era. Yes. Now you guys want to get really mad? Our so-called representative voted against the Rural Broadband Act. And guess what? It passed. And so their Rural Broadband Act's going out and our tax dollars are paying for it in Kansas and Arkansas, but not in California. So we need a new representative, and it's going to be me.
I remember I have to stay back here, else the microphone's not going to like it. I love this question because I am running for Congress explicitly to fight for the working families in our district. And as the working parent of 3 kids, I think I have a unique perspective that we really need in Congress. Very specifically, though, we need to think about tax policy and the ways holistically that we are trying to support our working families here in our district. As many of you are probably aware, the budget plan that's out right now would slash taxes for corporations And the vast majority of the tax cuts that are proposed that would increase our deficit would go to the very wealthiest Americans. That's not how we support working families here in our district. But more specifically on jobs, how do we grow our local economy? I think we invest in infrastructure. We have a representative right now who claims to be fiscally conservative. But I say he's such an extreme fiscal conservative that he's fiscally irresponsible. He refuses to support the smart investments that our region needs to grow and thrive. McClintock votes against highway funding. He blocks common sense bipartisan legislation that would improve fire prevention here in our district. And as Jessica said, he's actually voted not once but twice against federal funding for rural broadband. Those are all things that we need. Those are tools that people here in our district need to start small businesses, to grow them, to maintain them, and to provide good jobs here. The budget that's out right now would also cut federal funding for job training, which moves us in exactly the wrong direction. And finally, I think that we need to make a strong case here in this campaign that we are the party that fights for small businesses. I'm committed to streamlining regulations and, while still maintaining our priorities and important protections, providing excellent constituent services to make it easier for small and medium-sized businesses to operate here in our district. Because right now, when they call McClintock's office, some of you may have had this experience, you can call and you're not going to get an answer to your questions. I've worked in the federal government. I've seen that sometimes applications get lost under desks. I've fished them out when you get a congressional inquiry. So I'm committed to making sure that our businesses are able to get the approvals that they need to grow.
Thank you. Our next question is in the area of healthcare, and it goes like this. Healthcare coverage and rising costs of insurance are a problem for the residents of the district, as well as impacting healthcare providers and employers. What are your plans and ideas to effectively address these issues? We'll start with Regina.
Thank you. So healthcare is a very personal issue to me. I know how it can potentially upend a family's finances, no matter how careful you're planning. Some of you might be aware that I have twins. That's how I ended up with 3 kids under the age of 5, which I don't recommend doing. But the day that we found out we were having twins, the technician in the ultrasound room told us that it could be very medically complicated. I could be in the hospital for months. They could be in a NICU, 2 of them for months. And immediately I realized that with our health insurance, I thought it would be possible we could be stuck with hundreds of thousands of dollars of out-of-pocket expenses, even being responsible people with insurance. And then the ACA swooped in, the Affordable Care Act, and we realized that there were out-of-pocket maximums to prevent us from going bankrupt just because we happen to have twins. So on healthcare, I am absolutely committed to fighting to protect, defend, and improve the Affordable Care Act. In our district, it cut the uninsurance rate in half in just 2 years. It's providing important funding to our rural public schools, and we've seen that anytime we turn away, even for a second, there are new threats coming to it. But then we need to improve it, right? Premiums are rising. We need more support for small business owners and entrepreneurs. So specifically, here's what I would do. Legislate the cost-sharing reduction payments that are supposed to be coming to insurance companies. They need a guarantee that there's a stable marketplace out there. Then, work to reduce costs, focusing first on prescription drug costs. And after that, work to expand coverage, moving toward universal coverage. I think a logical next step, once we have well-functioning marketplaces, is to add in a public option that would provide an additional high-quality option to people, especially in rural areas where they may not have access to as many care providers and plans as they would like. I'll finally add that the Affordable Care Act, everyone has skin in the game. I suspect a lot of people here might be on Medicare, but by increasing reimbursements and the numbers of people with insurance in our district, the Affordable Care Act is helping rural care providers keep their doors open and therefore be there to serve you when you need them. Thank you.
Next up is Rosa.
So as many of you may know, we are actually in an open enrollment period right now. And for many people, what they have seen is that their premiums have actually doubled in price. So the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, whichever name you want to give it, has been instrumental just in the way that we have been able to start talking about universal health care and how do we get there. The ACA was incredible in the way that it got people on the Medicaid expansion for those states that were able to participate in that program. When we saw the GOP try to dismantle and repeal the ACA, what we saw is Republicans, we saw people who have voted for Trump, who were pleading with their GOP's congressmen or congresspeople to preserve the ACA because they would be losing coverage. In our district, we saw that McClintock didn't care about that, and he gambled with the idea that 70,000 constituents of his would lose coverage. But I don't think that the ACA does enough. Just simply giving people access to health care is not enough. What we need is affordable health care. And the only way that we will be able to accomplish that is by introducing a single payer model. And that is going to be through Medicare expansion for all. I truly believe that we are at that place right now, and what we need to start doing is not try to save the ACA and try to fix it and try to repair it. What we need to do is expand on a program that we know has worked, and that's Medicare. It is preposterous that we spend twice as much as the next 7 combined nations when it comes to our health care. And if we expand health care and we do it by a means of taxes to pay for those resources, then it would absolutely cost less than the $40 trillion that the ACA plans to spend within the next 10 years. So Medicare expansion for all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hold your applause.
You know, we don't go to a grocery store and buy milk and eggs and cheese and come home and get a bill for $2,000 2 months later and say, if only I had not bought out-of-network milk. Our healthcare system is broken. Rather than trying to fix it, McClintock actually voted for the healthcare repeal, which actually cost tens of thousands of people in our district access to healthcare if that goes through. He put us at risk. He's putting our rural hospitals at risk, and they are closing, and that means we have more and more people outside of that golden hour where they can be within an hour radius of medical emergency support. This is not good enough for our community. So the question is, what do? We need to have single-payer health care. End of sentence. You know, we need to be able to step up and do this, but the question is, how do we get there? You know, we're going to have pushback from conservatives saying, but how are you going to pay for it, Jessica? Here's how we get there. First of all, we need to pass healthcare transparency laws across the nation, just like California just did with pharmaceutical. So we passed a transparency law so that we can actually open up the books of pharmaceutical companies and hospitals and identify what specifically is driving up the prices of healthcare so that we can bring it down to the actual costs. Once we bring down the cost, then we'll be able to actually deliver healthcare across the country for everyone. We'll actually be able to pay for it without it risking our national debt. Canada calls it twice the service for half the price. That's what we need. We deserve a representative who's actively going to fight for creative solutions and understand the system so that we can change it at its core and move forward so that everyone in our community is healthy, strong, and can move forward and build a strong community for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, we're on to question number 3, and the subject is water. Much of the water that originates in CD4 counties is sent to Southern California. How do you propose to get Southern California water districts to pay the costs of the infrastructure for the water that is provided to them? And we'll start with Jessica.
Well, McClintock keeps sending our water to Southern California because that's where he's from. So what we need here in California, in our mountains, is actually a smart water strategy for the whole state. And it needs to start with restoring and protecting our water at its source. We need to, rather than building more dams, we need to start focusing on restoring high alpine wetlands and forest health so that we can protect our watersheds at their source, and our mountains can actually serve as the reservoirs that they are naturally designed to do. We next need to ensure that water, when it is in transit, is actually, we're not losing it in transit. Currently, through our old clay pipes in many of our towns like Placerville or through old gold rush flumes, we are losing our water at a rate of about 30% by using old infrastructure to transport it. And that would actually create jobs by updating our water infrastructure. And then finally, we need to combine these models that they're having in Colorado that are called fired faucet, where we actually have Southern California counties and the Bay Area counties that are recipients of our water investing in forest management and health. Because when we have a forest fire up in our watersheds, it evaporates the water and it also pollutes the water. And then down in those counties, they pay money to actually clean and improve the water. So having everyone investing in protecting the water at its source is the right solution to ensuring that we have a sustainable, long-term solution that improves water access for everyone in our country and conserves it at its source so that we can move forward as a state. Thank you.
Your applause until all candidates have responded. Thank you.
And now Regina.
Thanks. So I grew up in the shadow of the levees around Folsom Lake, and I actually went to Cabot, that's the junior high school that backs right up to the levee. We would go out there and do our running on the top of the levee for PE and try to dodge horses and rattlesnakes and things like that. So I understand that when we think water in this district, we often are imagining, as the question is, the big visible flows of water going to Southern California. But I would really reject the notion that this is a zero-sum game. I think there are 3 steps that we need to take to have a smart water policy that's going to protect small agriculture in our district and make sure that we're using our water responsibly. So the first is conservation and maintenance and improvements in infrastructure. Right? We need to be doing everything possible to invest in new technologies that can help us conserve water and to maintain our existing infrastructure, our levees. We've seen in Oroville what can go terribly wrong when we're not properly maintaining the infrastructure that we have. The second thing we need to do is invest in forest health, because by actively restoring our forests, we can actually produce, according to the Sierra Nevada Research Institute at UC Merced, between 9 and 16% more water that's going to go into our watershed. Because right now some of the forests are overgrown, they're consuming more of the water than they really should be. We should have more water flowing out for use, and that's a very significant amount of water that we can improve right there. The last thing we need to do is actually take action to fight climate change. The National Climate Assessment that just came out found that climate change is causing decreases in soil moisture, especially here in the West. And they're forecasting that these decreases in soil moisture due to rising temperatures are actually going to be the predominant cause of droughts in the future, not a lack of precipitation. So it's a little bit of an abstract connection, but I'm absolutely convinced that in order to do the right thing for water policy here in California and here in our district, we have to take action now to fight climate change. And that's why I'm the only candidate here who's committed to join the Climate Solutions Caucus if elected. Thank you.
Your applause.
Well, this is actually a really good question because I'm a geoscientist, and this is what I do for work. We work on environmental impact reports. I own a very small environmental consulting firm, and water, as you know, is a big issue here in California. But I think the question was, how do we get the southern areas, the southern counties, to pay for infrastructure for water transport? Well, they already do. The way that it actually works is that water is transported by contracts. And every single district in those counties, the water district, actually pays for the infrastructure projects for that. So what I would do as your representative is just make sure that we, in our district, are able to maintain our water supply, where there's sufficient water, where there's clean water, and where any other county, even Southern California, is paying for their fair share. That is what I would do as your representative. What else we can do about what's happening now with the current infrastructure? At the federal level, we can propose grants so that these water districts can actually start working towards repairing the infrastructure in these areas. Outside of that, the only other thing that we can do to preserve our water, maintain clean water, and work towards conservation projects is to do this thing called conjunctive use, where we actually store water during the really wet years, and it's available for use during dry years. Because that's really what got us where we are today, is that we were not prepared for the drought that we saw for this last decade. And that's what affected the trees in the national forest, the Sierra Nevada, the bark beetle infestation, the recurring fires. All of that could be prevented if we were working smart and ahead to preserve our water and have conservation efforts.
The next topic is one close to my heart as a sitting school board member here in Placerville, and the topic is education. And the question is, what are the educational issues in CD4, both in the K-12 schools and higher education, and how will you address those issues? And we'll start with Rosa.
So, when it comes to education, I get really passionate about this subject, so I'm going to try to stay still. But you know, one of the big things is I'm a single parent, and when I put my daughter in school, I believed that the educational program that she was in was the best that we could provide for her. And so I put her in a school in Lincoln, and we were newly married, and we didn't have too much money, so essentially, we were on the wrong side of the tracks. Not long after she was attending, we dropped her off at school, and there was a post saying that we could start applying to send her to another district because it was one of the lowest performing schools in the state. So as many parents who are duped into this idea that, you know, you can take your child to this brand new charter school who will be able to provide in every space where our public school system has failed. And that's what I did. Unfortunately, that was not the truth, because when it comes to independent charter schools, we see even more problems with bureaucracy, no oversight, and this enormous amount of money that is pulled from our public school systems to support charters. So halfway through the year, I chose to get creative and pull my daughter out and offer her the best education that I possibly could. So I ended up encroaching in the space of Granite Bay, where Regina grew up. So we ended up buying a mobile home, a trailer in Granite Bay, because that's what we could afford in an area where the average home price is $600,000. So why is it that it's okay that children's futures and opportunities are limited by the zip code that they live in? We need equity in schools. And Title I has not done enough, because there are reappropriations of funding that goes from school to school depending on what side of the tracks you live in. And that's exactly what we were facing. So I propose equity in every single school, not equality, because not every single school is going to have the resources that my daughter's school has, where I'm able to be a science mentor and go and teach kids who code, and they're working on their laptops and their iPads. We need to have those same resources for children in Oakhurst, where even rural broadband is scarce. Thank you.
Please hold your applause until all candidates have spoken. Thank you. Next up is Jessica.
I am the proud daughter of two public school teachers. I saw how hard they worked and also how poorly they were paid for their efforts. And my mother really valued education to the point that she would drive us 30 minutes each way to school so that we could go to some of the best schools in the region and get the best education. But I think that every kid in our district deserves and is a fundamental right to have access to a high-quality education with outstanding teachers who are rewarded for the work that they are doing in beautiful facilities with outstanding resources. What a simple and straightforward investment in our nation's future. You know, every good corporation understands that investing in human capital is the right way to go. Why our country doesn't see that investing in the health and education of our students is somehow a lower priority. It should be our top number one priority. So I am committed to ensuring that we increase teachers' salaries so that we can recruit and retain some of the best talent to be school teachers. I am committed to ensuring that our students have access to high-quality education and high-quality facilities, even in our rural areas, that those are fully invested in. We also need to make sure that we are focused on primary school, on pre-K education, so that children can get preschool, because the first 1,000 days of a child's life is some of the most critical to their development. And frankly, around the rest of the world, we judge a country's success by the quality of education that preschoolers get. It's one of the best indicators of the child's success in the rest of their lives. So we need to invest in that as well. So I am committed to ensuring that each and every one of our students has the access to the best education that they can get, and it's going to take a serious investment to do it, but it is well worth it because it will pay out dividends. Thank you.
And Regina.
All right, thank you. So candidates often stand up and say that they're here because of the public schools and the investments teachers made in them. I am literally standing here talking to you right now because one of my former teachers encouraged me to run for this office. So I want to take a minute and recognize Carl Grubach, who's in the back of the room. Wave. Thank you for saying that, Carl. Thank you for convincing me to do this. But very seriously, a lot of people look around at our public schools and they're frustrated. They're frustrated by the inequality. They're frustrated by the budgeting problems at the local level that have even driven some of our teachers to strike recently in Calaveras County. And they see the inequities that have been highlighted here. And I'm going to share sort of a dirty secret with you. Part of the blame lies at the state level. California currently ranks 41st in the country in per pupil funding to the school system. And that's unacceptable, especially in a state that includes such wealth in Silicon Valley, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco. It's also out of my direct control at the moment, given that I'm not running for state office. So what can we do at the federal level to offset those budgeting challenges and to do as much as possible to support our local schools and our teachers? First, I think that we should be at the federal level meeting our obligations to fund special education. The percentages of students in special education programs has gone up in our district. In some of our districts, it's as high as 17%, as recently told in the Murphys area, for example. And the federal government is only meeting half its obligations for the funding it's supposed to be contributing to special education. This contributes to the budget shortfalls that cause a lot of the other problems and prevent those higher teacher salaries across the board, for example. So we need to be meeting our federal obligations to pay for special education. We also need to keep in place the Affordable Care Act, which has actually provided important funding to our rural public schools because they provide medical services there that get reimbursed through Medi-Cal. In the face of declining enrollments, that enables them to pay for their infrastructure and keep the lights on and the buildings heated. Thank you.
Okay, we're into question number 5, and this is regarding local knowledge. Our current congressional representative doesn't reside in CD4 and has repeatedly demonstrated that he doesn't understand the needs and issues confronting residents of our congressional district. What do you feel are the specific needs of our district and how will you address them? And we will start with Regina.
So when Tom McClintock first ran for this seat back in 2008, he stood on the steps of the Auburn courthouse and he promised that he was going to move to our district just as soon as he could. Well, he's not a man who keeps his word. This is a story of promises made and promises broken. He has never bothered to move to our district. He still lives in Elk Grove. He has no ties to the community he's allegedly serving, and this is truly an extraordinary situation. Don't ever let him tell you that it's very common for representatives to be representing an area where they haven't lived in the past and where they've not even bothered to move or be involved in the community. Even my 4-year-old managed to walk in 2 4th of July parades in our district this summer. Can you guess how many Tom McClintock came and did? 0, of course. But how does this matter, right? When I look at things, I'm really committed to fighting for what's most important, the practical, pragmatic needs of people here in our district. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. People want good jobs. People want access to affordable health care, strong public education, and a clean, safe, healthy environment where we all have the freedom to go about our lives the way we want to. Those are issues that we're addressing elsewhere in the forum here tonight. So in terms of local knowledge and responsiveness, I wanted to highlight 2 things that have been brought to my attention in the campaign that aren't being mentioned elsewhere. And those are housing and veteran services. You know housing, affordable housing is a big problem when you can talk to a Chamber of Commerce one day and a fire chief the next day, and they both tell you their biggest problem is not being able to find housing for employees within an hour or an hour and a half of the communities that they're serving. Right now, we have a budget proposed that would cut important funding and support for housing in our communities. We're moving in the wrong direction, and so I think we need a representative who recognizes these needs and is actually going to fight to ensure that even though HUD is housing and urban development, we're actually better applying the programs that we're already paying for here in our suburban and rural areas. On veterans, we have more than 50,000 people in our district who are veterans. The current budget proposes to cut services to them and to cut their job training, and I think we owe them better.
Okay, now Rosa.
So My family ended up moving up here when I was about 9 years old, and we've been living here since. I'm the only candidate who's running who actually has lived in this district, grew up in this district, decided to raise my family in this district, started my first business here, and now I'm working to represent this district in Congress. Because it is extremely important that the person who represents and sits in this position knows the problems of this district because they were their own. The problems of this district have been mine. As I mentioned to you, once I got out of high school, the first thing that I did was join the working force, right when the housing boom was happening. But as many people, I also had that false sense of security, and I truly believed that the housing boom would continue and continue. Well, then came 2008, and the housing market crashed. And just within, overnight essentially, 1,000 employees within my company, which was one of the largest in California, started laying people off. At the end of the day, there was maybe 100 of us left, and it was really just to close down shop. The same issue can come if you talk about having to repair my life and rebuild it right after that. So what I chose to do was actually go back to school. I started working, I went back to school, and I started at the community level college. And I also know the hardships of students in this area when it comes to the cost of living and the cost of going to school, especially even community college, even with the governor's grant that we do have available in California. And then how hard it is to go into a 4-year after to finish your degrees. So in fact, like many people in this area, we opt to go to a state school. Because once I received my offer letter from UC Davis, I realized that with my savings that I had accumulated while I was still working and going to school, I could afford 1 semester at UC Davis, while I could afford an entire year at Humboldt State. So I opted for the cheapest, most affordable state school in California. And those are the tough choices that many of us have to make. So when we're talking about jobs, the economy, education, your children's education, where we're going next, I know the problems and I will find the solutions because these are my problems.
And now Jessica.
Well, unlike our Southern California representative, I actually live in the district. I live just up the highway in Pollock Pines. And I'm actually 5 generations from the foothills. My great-great-grandparents came over in covered wagons, and unlike the Donner Party, they made it. And they landed in Gold Run. And we still have that original homestead forest land today, a couple 100 acres, and my cousins live up there and selectively log and maintain it. I even pay property taxes on a gold mine that my great-great-grandfather won in a poker bet. So I grew up all over this community. We would spend our summers hiking and camping and fishing and hunting and backpacking, and I love our district. And my family actually spans the geographic and socioeconomic spectrum of the district. You know, we've got loggers and lawyers and school teachers and janitors and firefighters and police officers. And so when issues impact our district, they directly impact my family. And I'm tired of McClintock only representing his political party and not the needs of our community. And so I'm stepping up to run. And before I officially filed as a candidate, I wanted to make sure I would be an effective representative for our district and our specific needs, because that's what's been missing. So I did a listening tour for about 3 months this spring of our district. I hit all 10 counties. I met with our CAL FIRE chiefs and hospital boards, chambers of commerce, local mayors and county supervisors, and asked them, what are the issues that you're working on that needs real advocacy? Because I wanted to make sure I wasn't just gonna spout party line or political epithets. I wanted to make sure that I was talking about real issues facing real people. And let me tell you, forest fire obviously is one of the biggest issues, and a forest fire does not ask if you are a Republican or a Democrat before it comes into your neighborhood. These are community challenges that we need community solutions to solve. And so I'm going to be working on job creation through vocational training. We're working on broadband. We're working on water, healthcare, education, because I am serving our community. Thank you.
Thank you. We're about to move on to question number 6, but before we do, I would ask our volunteers to start collecting postcards. If you've come up with questions that you would like to have brought forward to us to consider asking the candidates, raise your hand, and the volunteers will come around and gather those cards. We'll do it one more time before we move into that section. The sixth question has to do with campaign finance. And our current representative relies heavily on campaign donations from the Koch brothers, big oil companies, and other money from outside our district. Where do you draw the line on taking campaign donations that are representative of the values of your candidacy and our district's constituency? And we'll start with Jessica.
So I would love to see us have a constitutional amendment to get rid of Citizens United so that we can get big money out of politics. In the meantime, we're going to have to compete with McClintock, who has funding straight from the Koch brothers. We need to be able to get the airtime, get the campaign put together in a way that we can actually out-message him. So I am proud to say that this last quarter, my first filing quarter, I actually outraised Tom McClintock. And we raised $268,000, which is more than any candidate in an entire election cycle has done. And this caused a small political earthquake and got our campaign on the map. We needed to get this. We were in the Washington Post and LA Times and Politico and these national newspapers. It caused national attention to say, oh, the 4th District is competitive. But here's what's exciting. That $268,000 came from over 1,000 individual contributions from people just like you, from here in Northern California. And those contributions came from across the political spectrum, from people saying, Jessica, we support you because you are breaking down this partisan gridlock and you are fighting for our community. We had over 100 Republicans donate to my campaign. You know, some of these guys were actually my dad's hunting and fishing buddies, and I said to them, I said, you gotta support me, and they said, you're running as a Democrat, why would we do that? And I said, well, Tom McClintock's gonna lower the river levels, and the salmon will die. And they said, they reached in their pocket, they pulled out $200 a pop, and they said, we're in. You know, and I've been grateful, you know, this is all also happening through house parties. You know, it is people that have never gotten involved in politics before. We had over 80 people come out to a house party I held in Sonora a couple days ago, and the hosts were an independent and a Republican who had never been involved in politics before and felt like we needed somebody to advocate for our community. So this is my commitment. We might get resources into our campaign to compete, but it's coming from folks like you, so please donate.
Next up, we have Regina.
It is a crime that Tom McClintock is representing Yosemite National Park and Lake Tahoe, and his top donors are Koch Industries. Do you guys agree? So I do think it's very important as a candidate to answer the question and to be clear with you about where my values and loyalties lie. And that's with you, with the people of the 4th District. As I've said, I've lived here for the vast majority of my life. I had my first jobs here. My mom teaches at Sierra College. My aunt, who's back here somewhere, works at the County Office of Education here in El Dorado County. We are invested here in our district, and we've built a very strong grassroots campaign. So here are some differences between me and Tom McClintock. Tom McClintock also gets a lot of his donations from agribusiness in the Central Valley and in Southern California. I don't. We don't have a single penny from agribusiness, and I intend to keep it that way. The fossil fuel industry. Again, climate change is incredibly important to our economy, to our future, to protecting our way of life, and passing on our traditions to our children here. I pledge to you that I am not going to take money from the fossil fuel industry. And I'm also proud to say that through a very grassroots campaign, without any support from outside organizations or PACs, we've also raised well over $200,000 at this point. And we haven't done that through $5,400 contributions, through individual couples giving $10,800 at a time to our campaign. That's been through donations of $25, $50. I don't know what tricks you've got up your sleeve, but when I talk to people, they often don't even pull out $200, they pull out $20. But that's how we're getting it done. And we've got an army of volunteers helping with that fundraising effort, 310 or so at this point. A lot of them are here tonight and can sort of wave to you. You can sign up with them afterward if you'd like to get involved. So, you know, yes, I'm committed to fighting for your interests, not special interests, especially not fossil fuels or big agribusiness. But as people say, if you want to get big money out of politics, you got to get small money in, and that's what we're doing. Please join us.
And now Rosa.
I have to move around for this question because this is one I'm passionate about. I was just endorsed by Justice Democrats, and if you know anything about Justice Democrats, one of the things that we're really working hard and we're going to be fighting for is to get money out of politics. Every single candidate on this slate makes an oath that we will not take any corporate PAC money, any lobbying money to buy our votes. As you can tell with Tom McClintock, he actually gets a return investment on the work he does for the Koch brothers. So every time that you see a donation, a recurring donation from the Koch brothers or his top donors from Southern California, you see that he's actually working for them. So my campaign, we have focused on making sure that we're only spending 17 cents to the dollar that every normal campaign spends. Because when I decided to run for Congress, and I was making my phone calls to speak to people, to see if I can get their support, the first thing they told me was to get $100,000 and then call them back. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that I don't believe in playing the game to be part of the game. I believe in going in already with the idea of changing the game. And so what I focused on was getting national endorsements. I've been endorsed now by brand new Congress as well. And in the next few days, we will be announcing 2 national endorsements that we've received that are going to really change the game here in this district. With our donations that we've been receiving, we are now only 134 shy of hitting 5,000 individual donors to our campaign. And I started with a $1, 1 vote campaign because I really truly believe that I'm here to vote and represent you. I don't believe that I have all the answers for everything, but what I know is that I can be your voice, and I can amplify your concerns in Congress, and I can fight like hell to represent the people of Congressional District 4.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. The last one will be from our youth summit that we recently held, but I will be reading item number 7. This is regarding an endorsement. It is a 2-part question, and it is directed to the candidates. If you don't receive the Democratic endorsement in January, February for Congressional District 4, will you support the endorsed candidate? And the other part is, further, what specific steps will you take to encourage and motivate your supporters to actively support the endorsed Democratic Party candidate and to create a unified campaign for the Democratic Party candidate to win November 8th, 2018? And we'll start with Rosa.
Should have stayed over there. Well, let's see. Well, the first question is if I will support the candidate that the California Democratic Party will endorse. Well, let me tell you, how many of you actually know how that endorsement process works? Raise your hand. Not very many people. So the way it works is that we have a delegate count, and those delegates essentially get behind one candidate, and they make a nomination to the state party. Well, we have had elections where we've had one Democratic candidate, and there has been no endorsement. Why? Well, because if the state party actually nominates a candidate, endorses and gets behind one candidate, that means that they're going to have to put some skin in the game and give us some money. And since we are a 10-plus point district, they haven't made that gamble. And unless we actually can get the district excited about voting and getting out there and voting against McClintock by voting for one of us, there will be no election of 2018 that we will be able to celebrate. So the only way that I see that this election will be won is if we unite our efforts for whichever candidate you choose, but you get out there and you help registration efforts, because we have over 100,000 eligible voters in this district that are not registered to vote. We also don't have majority within the Democrats or the Republicans. It lies within the no party preference and independent voters. So the way that we're going to really awaken this base, we have Latinos, who usually, on the best election ever, they'll maybe come out and vote at 56% of the registered voters. In this district, we have 12% Latinos, and out of that 12%, 7% of them are eligible to vote, but have not registered to vote. So I believe that I will be that candidate to be able to awaken that base and get them excited to come out there, to look towards a new future and say, I'm going to vote because my future is on the line. The same thing with our 16 and 17-year-olds who can now pre-register to vote in 2018. We've been visiting the high schools and doing a 18 by 2018 campaign, talking to them about why their future is on the line and why they need to get out to the polls in 2018. Thank you.
I'd like, hold your applause, please. And I'd like to remind the rest of the candidates, this is a two-part question. We will next go to Jessica.
So first, yes, we need to consolidate around one candidate. Second of all, what an amazing challenge to have. We have 3 amazing women stepping up to run for office. This is exciting. Yes, I am looking at my colleagues up here and knowing that these are women that I will be working with down the line as they take on offices and serve our community, because we're all committed to public service. Now, but let me tell you, I wouldn't be running if I didn't think the candidate for Congress was going to be me. And let me tell you why. So, first of all, we need to be able to, there's no path to victory unless you can out-fundraise Tom McClintock, and we're proving that. You know, we're going to be able to get the message out, build that professional campaign. The second thing is we need national attention on the race. I'm really grateful to have been the recipient of a group called The Arena. It's Obama's 2008 strategists that looked around the country, and they looked for 10 candidates to choose, and they were looking for candidates with a clear path to victory based on who the candidate is, the capacity to bridge the political divide, and the ability to change the political culture based on the candidate's values. And they selected 10 in the country, and I'm one of them. And so this is bringing national attention and national support to our race. And finally, in our unique district, who I am resonates across the spectrum. I am able to build that coalition. Because I come from a very Republican rural family, I have been messaging to my relatives for a long time. Plus, I have at least 100 Republican built-in voters, locked in based on my relatives. And also my experience in Iraq and my credentials in national security strategy really allow me to have the conversation that many people with the Democrat next to their name wouldn't be able to have. I have found even the harshest state of Jefferson folks will stop and turn around when I tell them that I was on the front lines in Iraq, and then we can have an open dialogue. That's what we need to win, and we're going to do it. Thank you.
And lastly, Regina.
Yes, I will absolutely support whoever the endorsed candidate is in this race, and I would do everything in my power, thank you, to encourage my volunteers to do the same. And I mean, we're talking over 300 people at this point, so that's a large number of people, but I'll do my best, especially because we have groups like Sierra Forward and a lot of allied organizations working here in our district. I think very specifically there are ways to ensure that that happens and to ensure we have a unified front. But I'd like to tell you that yes, the endorsement process really does matter, and here's why. I think that the way we beat Tom McClintock in this district is to put one endorsed Democrat on the ballot in June. That June election is not a primary. It is the first round of the general election. Every candidate goes on the ballot, everyone should show up and vote, and that has been my strategy for months now, is to get endorsed, to essentially start the general election campaign in February or in March of this year, and then to rebrand the June election here in our district as the first round of the general election, and spread the news far and wide that this is your first opportunity to vote against Tom McClintock and to vote for a more positive future for our district. The June election presents a real opportunity because we're coming back from years of wide margins that McClintock has won by. That is a serious obstacle to building out the larger scale operation that we need to really win in November. So in June, turnout is usually pretty low. He only got 80,999 votes in the last June top 2 election in the midterm year. We can do better than that. Bob Durlett, working with limited resources to do the best that he could, got 130,000 votes in the presidential election just now. That was the candidate who ran in our district in 2016. The votes are there. We mobilize people. We beat Tom McClintock in June, and that's the political earthquake that we need to get the Sierra Club, the League of Conservation Voters, Emily's List, all the allies that we need to build out a great ground game going into November. I hope you'll come on board with that plan.
Thank you. Our final prepared question tonight comes from our youth summit, actually, that was conducted locally here not too long ago. And it's not surprising they would ask a question like this. And the question is, how will you lower college and higher education tuition? And we will have Regina start.
So after I graduated from college, I was in the Foreign Service for a few years. I was working for the State Department on border security in Washington, D.C. and in Latin America. And then I went back to school, and I actually was able to do a PhD with a scholarship. Part of the funding I had came from the National Science Foundation, and Tom McClintock literally tried to take my fellowship away from me. It was paying my tuition, it was allowing me to do the research I needed to do to get my degree, and he voted to kill that program within the National Science Foundation that was funding me. So that was when I first launched my first crusade against Tom McClintock. It was back in 2012. And I got the local papers to cover this, that he was cutting important funding for students from our area. I am committed to making sure that people can afford higher education. And this really matters here in our district. I mean, more generally, I think that Pell Grants are incredibly important. They're on the chopping block right now. McClintock recently voted to freeze their value over time, which would mean you get less college for your Pell Grant as the years go on. But in our district, there are some really unique needs. We've got a lot of community colleges here. We've got people who go back to school part-time and need some new job training, maybe aren't in a degree program, but need to get some new skills. The tax plan that's out there right now would actually get rid of the lifetime learning credit. This is a little bit technical, but you can use that credit for any kind of higher education, for furthering your skills. As I said, even if it's job training, it's not for a degree. That's up to $2,000 a year of a tax credit that goes to folks who need some additional education, often through our community colleges. The tax plan out there would get rid of that and instead slightly expand a different tax credit that can only be used for your first 5 years of post-secondary education. That means that all those folks in our district who need to go back to school, who need some additional skills, who are utilizing our community colleges, a serious source of funding for them is under threat. So very generally, keep and expand Pell Grants, and more specifically to our district, fight to preserve the lifetime learning credit. Thank you.
Next up is Rosa.
So I don't plan on lowering college or higher education costs. What I propose to do is provide tuition-free vocational programs and tuition-free higher education. We are at a place that we can afford it. We are the richest nation in the world, and we can definitely afford to put our kids through great K through 12 and even more amazing higher education for 4-year degrees. I also propose that for veterans who can use the service that they had, not just for a 4-year degree, but if they entered the service with a 4-year degree, that they can use that money for a master's or a PhD program, which for many, that incentive goes unused. And the way that we're actually going to be able to provide higher education for free is, number one, by closing the enormous loopholes that corporations have, and that would really be able to bring money into our federal funds so that we can pay for this. The second is, obviously, we will have to find a way to reduce our discretionary military spending so that we can use some of that tiny little sliver of over 50% of our discretionary spending into higher education. I have started walking this entire district already, knocking on doors. And one of our first experiences was here in El Dorado County. And we were in El Dorado Hills. I knocked on a door, and I kid you not, I think maybe 90% of people that opened their doors to me were Republicans. And I have a secret for you. There are Republicans here amongst us because those are some of my supporters. We talked about education. We have a group locally who has just done a survey, and the number one issue that they found in this district was education. And as I was knocking on all these doors, that was repeated to me over and over and over again, even by people who proposed that we close up our borders with a wall. I said, okay, let's do it. How do we maintain our number one status globally? It's through education. We have to maintain our innovative ideas. We have to have that presence of great proposed ideas, and that only can happen with education. So for education for all.
And finally, we will have Jessica.
About 20 years ago, 80% of businesses in the U.S. had started with using their home mortgages as collateral to start the business and get the loan. Today that doesn't happen as much because our students are graduating from college and we all complain, why are millennials living at home? They are living at home because they are paying the equivalent of a home mortgage in student debt. Our student debt problem is actually a huge drag and weight on the financial future of the U.S. economy, and it is dragging us backwards. We need to start thinking long-term and strategically about this. First, every student that graduates from our high schools should be able to go to community college or state school for free. Second, if students want to go to a private university, we should have a model that looks similar to the GI Bill, where we allow them to do several years of service in an area that our country needs them. It could be anything from AmeriCorps to Conservation Corps, working in a rural hospital, working in legal aid. There are many different areas they could work to get grants that would then allow them to pay for their schooling in reward for the service that they are providing to our country that is much needed. Having a foundation in higher education improves the economic health of our entire country in the long run. So we need to start making a smart forward investment in higher education for everyone and ensure that access is available so that our economy and our country can grow. Thank you.
So that concludes our pre-planned questions. Let's take a moment to give all three candidates a big round of applause. At this time, if you have questions for the candidates, raise your hand and our volunteers will come around and gather the cards. We're going to take about a 5-minute break to gather the questions and select the final 5 questions, and then we'll return to allow all three candidates to answer the questions you've asked. Thank you.
Questions were collected throughout the evening when we first started. Some people feel that they were did not have the ability to participate. Your cards have been read. We are only taking 5 questions. Everybody has lots of questions, so I would suggest that you contact each one of these candidates and ask them directly. Thank you.
Yeah, we tried to focus on questions just from a methodology standpoint, so you understand how we took the questions. We tried to focus on questions that addressed things that had not been raised in the original 8, either in their answers or in the questions that we asked. And also try to get questions that addressed the specific audience tonight, which, as we've said before, is a joint audience of both El Dorado Progressives and El Dorado County Democrats. And so with that, away we go.
Okay, the candidates will have 2 minutes to answer these questions, and I will start from left to right. I will start with Jessica first. What are you going to do to protect a woman's right to choose? How will you present Republicans' efforts to defend Planned Parenthood and deny women the right to control their own bodies?
I think the word was defund.
It's the defund, yeah, sorry.
Yes, I will absolutely protect a woman's right to choose. I think reproductive health is critical in our community. I took a tour of Planned Parenthood last week, actually, and understood how that is an underserved population that needs access to health care to preserve and protect women going forward. This is half of our population. So the question is, how do we present that to our conservative friends who are really strongly against abortion based on their religious beliefs? Well, let's focus in on a couple things. You can start with facts by pointing out that what Planned Parenthood does is a very small percentage. Abortion is about 2% of the services. Everything else is women's health and preventative care. And then, amazingly enough, I've been talking to my Republican relatives in this community who are very devout in their beliefs, and they say, we support Planned Parenthood because they recognize that that is a key tool in actually reducing abortion rates across the country. There is a reason that we have one of the lowest abortion rate in the country that we've ever had since Roe versus Wade. And this is amazing progress, and it's because of investments in preventative care and in family planning and education of our women and students. So it is critical that we continue funding these programs. I also point out to our Republican colleagues that their tax dollars don't ever fund abortion. And I think that's an important distinction for people to remember, because nobody wants more abortions. We want to get the tools to be able to reduce those rates so we have a healthy population and that we are promoting and protecting and giving everyone access to the best health care they can find. Thank you.
Hold your applause, please. Okay, Regina will be next.
So I can absolutely promise to you that in Congress, I'll be a strong advocate for women's abilities to control their health, make their own decisions, and contribute to their families and our community. We know that strong, independent women make for strong families and strong communities. So I actually would sort of reject the notion that Planned Parenthood is so different from any other healthcare provider. I mean, I myself have been to Planned Parenthood as a patient. A lot of people have across the socioeconomic spectrums throughout their lives. I think what we need to be focusing on is, yes, preventing drastic cuts to Planned Parenthood, but also looking broadly at how we protect and improve women's rights, women's access to important health care, and their quality of life. There are a couple important pieces there. The Affordable Care Act has been really important. I mean, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but this has made big improvements. It removed gender rating, the ability for insurance companies to charge women more than men just for being women. Pre-existing conditions. Anyone who's had a C-section, that can be considered a pre-existing condition if you want to go get health insurance, if not for the protections under the Affordable Care Act. We need to ensure that women can access contraception, regardless of who their employer is, what that employer's religious beliefs might be. And Tom McClintock is on the wrong side of that issue. He has been for his entire career. When he was in the state legislature, he actually voted against requirements to get insurance companies to cover contraception just like any other drug. That's crazy. He wanted things like Viagra to be covered, but not contraception. Seriously, I can't make this stuff up. And we also need to be protecting women's rights more broadly. McClintock opposes equal pay for equal work vociferously. He is one of only 9 Republicans who voted against the GOP-authored removal of the Violence Against Women Act, and I think we can agree he's got to go. As we can see, when we are fighting domestic violence, when we're improving the quality of women's lives, that actually contributes to all of us having a better quality of life. So that's how I would present the issues. It's an investment in our whole community.
And Rosa? Spill on aisle 1.
I know. That's why I was not supposed to bring my coffee up here, but I did, and I just spilled a little bit. So when it comes to reproductive rights, I think that is the first attack on women's prosperity. Having these men, I'm sure that we all saw the picture of all these men making the choices for women on reproductive rights was terrifying. Every single one of us, at least I speak for myself, when I said that I've used Planned Parenthood as my medical source, because we haven't always had access to health care. We haven't always had access to affordable health care. And so it's imperative that we protect Planned Parenthood for more reasons than just reproductive rights. I really truly believe that preventing a woman from choosing if she would like to have a child or have an abortion, it is the first step to preventing her from advancing her career, from planning her family, and from advancing her own children into better futures. In the United States right now, 2/3 of the households that have children under the age of 18, the woman is the breadwinner. So tell me why we are not able to make our own choices for our own bodies and decide if we are going to continue having children or not. When I was working in North Dakota, one of the things that I realized was that in North Dakota there is one Planned Parenthood, just one. And over the years, legislators have continuously made these tiny little laws that are really getting rid of Planned Parenthoods. They can't be within 50 feet of a grocery store. They can't be within 200 yards of a school. They can't be within a mile of another hospital. And that's the way that they're eliminating Planned Parenthood over and over again. And I volunteered when I heard that there was only one Planned Parenthood in North Dakota to drive to Fargo and serve as an escort to make sure that the women that were going there for preventative care services were protected by me and other people who were standing there, because the people there were extremely aggressive versus the women that were walking into Planned Parenthood. Because there's this idea that Planned Parenthood only serves to serve abortions, and that those abortions are paid by the taxpayer, and all of those are myths that we need to debunk.
Thank you. Our next question is from the audience, is this. Address the real need for reform within the Democratic Party. And do you embrace progressive solutions and agenda? And we will start with Rosa.
So I'm running as a progressive because I really believe in the Democratic platform. And I think that it's a shame that we have to call ourselves by another name just to actually work on the Democratic platform. Our platform is very progressive. I'm running on a slate with the endorsement that I received from running Congress with Republicans and independents alike, and we are all running on progressive issues, because progressive issues are issues about education. They're issues about our economy, and they're issues about having a voice against the interests of corporations. I believe in our Democratic Party. I have been a long-time Democrat in this area. I know many people within the local club since the 2008 elections of Hillary and Obama, when we were organizing together. I truly believe in our delegate system, that if we go through that and the delegates choose you as the better candidate, that we can do things. But as we saw with the revelations from Donna Brazil, is that we are at a point right now where money still dictates how our policies how our politics work. And what we saw from that revelation, it's not that Hillary might have skewed the election, but what we see is that the need for money, the push for money, is what skewed the election and skewed essentially the primaries. So I do support a progressive agenda. I support that every single candidate supports those progressive issues, because those are issues that the nation is really working on and cares about right now. And the job of an elected official is to be a public servant. It is our job to represent the people and represent their issues and represent their interests. And we are not doing that right now.
Next up is Jessica.
I used to joke that I was a Teddy Roosevelt Republican, and for you history buffs out there, Roosevelt started the progressive movement. But in this race, and in most of my life, I've been avoiding labels. I really stand on values and community. You know, I am not Bernie Sanders. I am not Hillary Clinton. I am Jessica Morse. And I am fighting for the needs of our community, and you can put any label on me that you want, and I will fight for you. This is the foundation we have. I will fight for people who are vulnerable and underserved. I will fight to ensure that we have access to education, healthcare, and I fight for these values. Now, here's how we can bridge this divide in our community, because you know all of our neighbors. And McClintock is somebody who only votes for his party, who only votes along a very narrow ideology and sticks to party line, rather than voting for and supporting our community. He believes that the government should do nothing. But there is a real cost to doing nothing, and our community is paying for it. Let me give you an example. Homelessness. Up in Placerville, they calculated that it cost them $35,000 per homeless person per year in terms of hospital stays and police intervention. That's the cost of doing nothing. They did a tent city experiment for about a year. I was talking to the mayor about it. And that tent city experiment, she said, well, it didn't work very well because we only got 10 people into permanent homes and jobs. And I said, well, out of how many? And she said, out of 30. And I said, wait, they're paying for their own homes and earning their own income? And she said, yes. And I said, you have just saved your community $350,000 per year by solving this problem. And that's the type of approach we need. It doesn't matter what label we put ourselves or the past fights. We need to start moving not left or right, but forward into our community where we are understanding the root of a problem and actively working towards a solution based on the real values that everyone in our community community upholds, which is this deep sense of community, and that's what I'm fighting for. Thank you.
And Regina.
So I believe that being a progressive means being concerned about progress, about moving things forward for our district. And that's why the question I ask myself and the criterion that I will use to make decisions is, how can we do the most good for the most people in the shortest period of time? And I'm realistic about that. I would call myself a pragmatist in addition to being a progressive in that sense, because I recognize that we are going to be dealing with probably a Republican-controlled Senate. I mean, after the election results we saw this week, who knows, anything's possible, maybe not. But I think that in order to get things done in Congress, you actually need a candidate who's got a real credible commitment to bipartisanship and to moving things forward. And I want us to be optimistic and happy tonight, but I gotta mention that we're gonna have either Trump or Pence in the White House for the congressional term that we're all running for. And so, that's why I'm trying to focus on things where we can actually take action at the federal level. For example, protecting all the important gains for people here in our district around the Affordable Care Act, finding other areas of consensus. And I've made credible commitments that I am actually committed to bipartisanship and to really representing this district. That's why I've pledged to join the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a new caucus in Congress dedicated to action. It's 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats, and they're trying to do exactly what I am, identify those areas where we can move forward and make real changes in people's lives. I'd also like to say that I can bring a unique set of skills to this race and to appealing people here in our district. I've got high-level experience. I've served in the State Department as a Foreign Service officer. I have sat down and had meetings with government ministers in other countries in my research and in my time in the State Department. And I've been an academic. I've given lectures in the top universities around the world and have been really successful in my career, but have stepped away from that. But at the same time, I have the skills to bring to the table, but at the same time, I'm not a party insider. My campaign is not being run by Obama campaign operatives or other people from the National Party. It's being run by you, and I'm really grateful for you.
Thank you.
Okay, our third question from the audience is regarding DACA. The statement is, McClintock maintains that, one, our borders must be, I'm trying to read the handwriting, I'm sorry, secured, and a wall built before legalizing DACA residency. And two, DACA should not be made permanent and open-ended so as not to encourage more illegal children in the U.S. Please comment on your position with regard to those statements. And we'll start with Regina.
So if elected, I would actually be the only person in Congress with real experience in our immigration system. When I was in the State Department, I issued and denied thousands of visas, and I also led the fraud prevention unit at the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala City. When I came back, and when I've been back in the U.S., I've also worked as a Spanish-English interpreter for more than a decade, part-time. And my husband is even an immigrant. We did the naturalization process with him because he's from Canada. So I've seen all sides of our immigration system, and I bring a unique perspective to this. And I'm someone who could actually get things done and take action on this issue in Congress. I'm absolutely committed to passing a clean DREAM Act at the federal level to protect our dreamers. And when we say a clean DREAM Act, we mean a DREAM Act that is not tied to other conditions, other restrictions, in particular funding the border wall. I mean, the border wall, I can tell you, is the very definition of wasteful government spending. And guess what? Tom McClintock is explicitly in favor of spending taxpayer dollars from our district on that border wall. More broadly, I'm also committed to bipartisan immigration reform. I would like to see a path to citizenship for people who are here, who can pass background checks, and who are willing to pay fees to move forward in that program. But I also understand that any grand deal is going to require some increase in enforcement. And that's why I always say, you want to talk about enforcement? Great. I've actually worked in immigration enforcement, but let's do that in a way that's just and fair and actually good for our economy. So what I would propose investing in is a functioning biometric exit system to track who's leaving the United States at our airports. This was recommended by the 9/11 Commission many years ago, and it hasn't been implemented because it's never been funded appropriately by Congress. I can tell you as a former consular officer, when someone wants to renew their visa, we can tell when they've entered the US, but not when they've left or where they left from. This is a threat to our national security, and even for those folks who are concerned about undocumented immigration, more than half of people who end up here undocumented come with visas and then overstay. So this actually addresses that problem in a fair and effective way.
Okay, Rosa.
I came to the United States as a refugee from El Salvador at the age of 2. At that time, El Salvador was being faced by a civil unrest where the press was silenced, and anyone who spoke out against the injustices that the government was doing, their lives were threatened. And that's exactly what happened to my mother. After her life was threatened, she made the choice to risk it all, to leave everything behind that she knew, including her 2 young daughters, and made the trek to the United States on foot, crossing every border, Guatemala and Mexico, until she reached the United States. Since then, we were able to find our way towards citizenship. We became residents, and when my mother became a citizen while I was a minor, I also became a citizen myself. But we were the lucky ones, because at the time, the legislation in place favored people who were leaving those countries, who had actually worked, who actually worked in the military, and they were given priority to come to the U.S. But that wasn't the same story that applied to the rest of my family. So while the entire country was in peril, they also had to migrate here illegally, crossing every border on foot, but not every single one of them was able to get political asylum. Not every single one of them was able to get a worker's visa. Not every single one of them was able to get residency. And over the years, many of them, for decades and decades, just kept renewing their work permits that expire every 2 years. In 2007, my father was killed in El Salvador by the MS-13. He was a businessman who was targeted, and as they left him there for dead and lit the place on fire, they also had shot my 14-year-old brother in the head and left him for dead as well. As a bullet between his head and his scalp, his skull and his scalp was there, he pretended to be dead and was able to escape only when he felt it was safe enough to get up and try to find an exit route and reach the nearest place for help. While my sister and I fought hard, really hard, to get him to the U.S., to keep him out of harm's way, my brother was actually able to visit me just last year, 9 years later, on a visitor's visa in San Francisco. It is because our system may not be broken, but it is in need of immediate repair, because we have quotas that prefer certain countries over others. My country is one of the undesirables that Trump talks about nonstop. But other countries, maybe like Canada, they get a heads up on the process. My buddy from the UK was able to visit me, but his girlfriend from Poland was unable to come and see us either.
And now Jessica.
We have 800,000 dreamers in our country who were all students that our education system invested in, who are all contributing members of America's society. 40,000 of those students have started their own small businesses and are employing Americans. So when we hear the argument that somehow removing immigrants from our society would create jobs, this actually would be a huge waste on our people. Would be able to have a dialogue moving forward, and we'd have a practical path towards that. So we need a multi-part strategy where we're actually actively reforming our immigration system, but also actively working to ensure that we are expanding job creation opportunities in our communities so that everyone is employed and content and our economy can move forward. Thank you.
The next question addresses business taxes. Mr. McClintock maintains that lowering business taxes will provide the following benefits: more affordable products, higher wages and more jobs, and higher returns on retirement funds. Please address each of these assertions and why you agree or disagree with them. And we'll start with Jessica.
I disagree with Tom McClintock, shocker. And here's why. You know, he is somebody who doesn't fully understand our tax system. My undergraduate degree was in economics, and so, you know, when you look at our tax system in the U.S., we have one of the highest income rates in the world, income tax rates in the world, but we actually have one of the lowest GDP to tax revenue rates around developed countries around the world. That means that when we talk about just raising taxes or lowering taxes, it's like arguing over whether or not we should raise the sides of a colander without plugging all the holes. We need to be able to plug the holes so that businesses can't just hide their money overseas and not pay their taxes at all. So we need to start doing fundamental tax reform so that people are actually paying their taxes. I was also really disappointed in McClintock's support of the recent tax bill because it included, it removed the deduction for state taxes on your federal income. That means that they want to double dip on your taxes. You can't deduct that anymore. 4 in 10 people in our district deduct their state income taxes off of their federal income tax levels. And that means that at an average rate of about $5,000 per person. McClintock is basically trying to reach into our district and say, let's give tax breaks to the wealthy by lowering these corporate tax rates and instead taking it out of the pockets of the people in our community. We need a really smart, intelligent reform of our entire tax system so that people are paying their fair share and that the revenues from our taxes are actively going towards real use. So I am here to stand up and say I'm not going to hold party line on taxes. We're not going to listen to McClintock's rubbish anymore. We're going to have a smart tax strategy going forward so that your hard-earned tax dollars are actively working. Thank you.
Next up is Regina.
So I would actually say that Tom McClintock understands the budget process and our tax strategies all too well. But the problem is that he understands how to work the system to benefit the special interests that are bankrolling him and to whom he owes his allegiance instead of people here in our district. I mean, one of the most offensive speeches, and when we're talking McClintock, this is a high bar, but one of the most offensive speeches I've seen him give recently was actually this summer, talking about the budget and Trump's proposed budget. And he brought out the old cliche that we shouldn't just be giving a man a fish because then he'll eat for a day. We should be teaching a man how to fish and then he'll eat for a lifetime. Well, guess what? In that same budget he was talking about, they were proposing cuts to job training, cuts to really important investments in our communities, cuts to community development block grants that then provide a lot of the funding for important organizations that help to grow strong communities and a strong local economy. He votes against nearly every bit of infrastructure investment in our district that actually would benefit businesses here. So I think that if we want to talk about how to grow small businesses, how to invest in our district, you should tell people to come talk to us. McClintock is betraying us. And the latest tax bill that's out there is another illustration of that. Absolutely. So what are the core goals that seem to be underlying this question? I think a good quality of life and the ability to afford a secure lifestyle is really important, and that's something I'm fighting for. In particular, retirement. We have a lot of retirees in our district, and we honor their hard work by ensuring that they can have the secure retirement they've earned. McClintock jeopardizes that. He co-sponsored the Financial Choice Act that would have removed the requirement that retirement investment advisors act in the best interests of their clients. I mean, seriously? Again, he's fighting for someone, and it's not us.
And finally, Rosa.
So I support tax cuts. I really do. But I support them for the hardworking people of the U.S. And what we see right now is this reverse Robin Hood that's happening. I was watching the conference that they were holding when they were talking about the new tax plan, and that number, they just kept repeating it, $1,185. $1,185. Imagine what you could do with that when Christmas is right around the corner. That's about the time that I turned off the TV. Because there is no way that we can continue lying to people and telling them that we're going to increase their earned income credit, but we're actually reducing it, and we're actually giving those funds now in cuts to huge corporations. And it's a damn shame that people who work for these massive corporations are not even able to buy the materials that those corporations produce, the services, go eat at that restaurant, because we're going to end up with a huge imbalance that's going to affect our economy in an enormous way, where we're going to have that 1% that are going to be the only ones who are going to be able to feed the economy, and the rest of us, we will have such low wages that we will be able to be, surplus our economy or give into our economy. We will be really doing a disservice to ourselves if we continue these tax cuts to huge corporations on the backs of the working class. So what I propose is I want to strengthen unions so that we can have support our brothers and sisters to collective bargaining, so that we can have a fair and just wage, so that we can actually demand that these corporations give us a piece of the pie. If we're making them billions upon billions upon billions, as Trump likes to say, then we deserve a living wage. And so I support tax cuts for the working class, for small businesses, and every corporation over 200 employees needs to pay their fair share.
Okay, for our final question from the audience, this is an environmental question. With all the cutbacks and rollbacks of environmental protections with the current administration, what would you do to help restore and further protect our environment to help reverse climate change? Also, do you favor permanently protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? And we will start with Rosa.
So as a scientist and one that works in natural sciences, this is something that we're actually combating right now. Right now is one of the times that we are creating the new forest management plans at the federal level. And usually creating these plans takes about 5 to 7 years, depending on how big the project truly is. But they've only allowed us to get funding for the next 2 years, hoping that we run out of time and we won't be able to create new management plans, and then they'll call us failures at the Forest Service, at Forest Management, at BLM, at the EPA. So all the budgets right now are being slashed, and everyone who works in these industries, in these agencies, is a devout believer in climate change, and we are believers that we should be preserving our planet because there is no planet B. In fact, because of the way our education system works, we don't have a NASA program that can take us to Mars and have us live there. So we have to invest in our environmental programs right now. We used to be a leader, but now we have that role being taken over by Xi Jinping in China. And that's something that really puts us and sets us back as a player within the world stage, as a leader on policy and environment and in industry. So overall, I think I was listening to one of the podcasts when a woman was talking about our government will never act until they see the impacts of climate change are too costly for them to keep ignoring it. And unfortunately, that's probably what we're going to have to end up seeing unless we get a brand new Congress into Washington right now who will fight for those protections, who will prevent those rollbacks, who will stop Scott Pruitt from ruining our environment, and who will actually believe in environmental protections instead of dismantling everything that has been set in place.
Next, Jessica.
Tom McClintock spends a lot of time denying climate change. Here in our district, you don't even need to argue about whether or not it's real. We have bark beetle kill, we have our wells going dry, we have fire. We are living the actual results of it. Now, but I want to give you a different thought on this. When McClintock says that climate change isn't real and cuts funding to climate change research at the Department of Energy and renewable energy funding, what he's actually doing is cutting funding towards life-saving resources for our troops. When I was in Iraq, I was out on the front lines and discovered that the U.S. pays nearly $600 a gallon to get fuel out to the front lines of war zones. When our tanker trucks were hit, we were stranded out in 132-degree weather, and our bases suddenly became little ovens where everyone was getting a heat stroke, and our troops still had to go out on the front lines and serve when they're not at their sharpest. We had over 3,000 American casualties at the height of the war in Iraq, transporting fuel alone. The military has made it a top priority to start funding research in renewable energy and scalable renewable energy that you can take out to the front lines. I was working on this when I was the advisor to the 4-star Admiral at Pacific Command. We were using all of this renewable energy technology to forward America's interests and to protect our troops. But guess where the military was actually buying these companies that they were scaling and investing in? These companies started with grants from the Department of Energy, which the Trump budget, the Climate Change Division at the Department of Energy, which the Trump budget recently cut and McClintock cheered on. So you don't have to talk about whether or not climate change is real to all of your friends to get them on board with this idea. You talk about how we need to invest in renewable energy and climate solutions to be able to save and protect our troops. And that's a top priority. Thank you.
Okay, and the final one is Regina.
So when Tom McClintock denies the reality of climate change and votes against investments in renewable energy, which he's done to the tune of $1 billion, he's not just voting to endanger our troops. He is voting against the interests and values of our district. He is voting to endanger our own local economy here. I mean, we get millions of visitors per year to our district precisely because of our ski industry, our amazing forests, our beautiful rivers, our great natural spaces. So many of our small businesses depend on those visitors. Furthermore, if you drive around our district, I am constantly impressed, whether I'm out at an organic farm in Cathy's Valley or even here in some of the shopping centers where there are businesses, practically everybody has got solar panels out because it makes economic sense. This is the future we need to be investing in. And you might be surprised that people in our district already agree. This is not a partisan issue. In our district, 69% of adults understand that climate change is real. 68% of them say that it's a threat to future generations. 81% support federal funding for research into renewable energy. So the real question is, why are they being represented by somebody who completely disagrees with them? I'm committed to changing that, to actually fighting for our local economy and conserving our great outdoors. I've committed to joining the Climate Solutions Caucus, and very specifically, I would propose supporting, I do support James Baker's plan to fight climate change. He's a Republican, and yet he's got a plan that I think we can get some traction on in Congress. This would include a carbon tax, carbon dividends that independent, nonpartisan analysis think would bring about $2,000 a year to the average family. Try talking about that to your neighbors and they'll be happy. And then rebates and fees to compensate companies who are importing and exporting from countries that don't have similar measures in place. I do disagree with the last point in his plan, which would have repealed the Clean Power Plan, but that's already under threat. So things are changing rapidly. Thank you.
All right, let's give a round of applause. Good audience questions. Thank you all for putting those forward. I think we've got some great answers as well. Before we move to the closing statements, I'd like to remind you that the green forms that you have out there in the audience, please fill those out and leave them here before you go. Those will be tabulated and shared with the candidates after the forum. And also to our viewing audience on YouTube, there will be a link to an online version of that survey at the end of the candidates forum. It's not, if the link is on there now, it's not actually functioning, but after the forum is over, you'll, if you're watching online, you'll have a chance to fill out the same feedback. At this time, we're going to give the candidates 2 minutes each to present their closing statements. Jessica will go first, followed by Regina, and then Rosa will close out the evening.
My career took me all over the world. I served in Iraq for several years. I worked on the federal budget process at the State Department, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but it's very useful if you want to be effective in Congress. And I served as the advisor to the 4-star Admiral at U.S. Pacific Command. And so I have worked on our national security strategy, and my entire career is dedicated to public service. I learned a lot of lessons, but one of the most critical lessons I learned was actually right when I came home from Iraq. It was the height of the war, and I was talking to a couple of my cousins. This was in early 2007, right when the surge was starting. And one of my cousins, these are cousins who watch different cable news channels, if you get my drift. And one of my cousins was talking all about WMDs and who had lied about them, why we were in Iraq in the first place. The other was talking all about the Saddam Hussein trial and the newfound freedom of the Iraqi people. None of them were talking about what we were seeing on the ground, which was the rise of the insurgency that would destabilize the region and later morph into ISIS. I turned to my cousins and I said, trying to describe a rock through a red lens or a blue lens is like trying to describe a rainbow using two colors. If you can't see the whole picture, you can't see the problem and you can't solve the problem. I am running today because I am tired of this partisan gridlock where people are dug in on either side and leaving our community in the lurch. I am committed to fighting for real solutions for our community that understand the root of a problem and then working up from there. You know, Tom McClintock talks a lot about the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, but I think this is a man who actually needs a history lesson. Because when I signed on as a public servant, I took an oath. And it's an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's not an oath to protect a political party or a personality or a position. It is an oath to protect the very foundation of our democracy. And that democracy was built in dialogue. So we are launching something called the New Morse Code, which is going to incorporate dialogue and understanding into its foundation. And I'm excited to have you join me because that is how we are going to win. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Virginia.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Now, I'll tell you, a year ago tonight, when election night finally ended, I was crushed. A lot of you probably were. But I looked around and I looked at my kids, and as I said before, I said, I've got to do something. It wasn't just that I was concerned about their futures in a literal sense. I also understood that future generations were going to look back and ask each one of us, what did we do? What did we do to get involved and to stand up for our values and stand up for our communities after the 2016 election? I'm doing everything that I can by running for Congress, and I know a lot of you are doing everything you can too, whether writing letters, coming out to meetings, organizing, talking to your neighbors, and that's what's making our campaign possible. I'm asking for your support in the endorsement process that's coming up, because I think that our campaign has the best shot at winning next year. We've got a strong grassroots organization and serious fundraising. I'm someone who is here from the region, strongly rooted, strongly connected, and yet I've got the national and international experience to be effective. And, you know, that balance really matters. That's how this district has almost been won before by Democrats. Some of you have probably lived here long enough to remember the 2006 and 2008 races. But what about 1990 and 1992? That was when Pat Malberg almost won this district as a Democrat. And yes, her name's Patricia. She was a woman. She got 46 and 49% of the vote against John Doolittle. And I had the opportunity to meet her recently. And we discovered an amazing coincidence that I wasn't even aware of. Back then, her campaign logo was also the golden poppy. And I don't know why she chose it exactly, but I chose it very intentionally because there's no blue, it's fairly nonpartisan, and I'm really trying to tap into the sense of regional pride that people have here in our district. Yes, we have to be reaching out to people who are nonpartisan. Yes, we have to be reaching out to Republicans. And I think we do that respectfully by tapping into the other identity that we all share, which is pride in our region, a desire to see our region grow and progress in the ways that we need to. That's what I'm fighting for, and I hope you'll join my campaign. Thank you.
Last year, actually today marks a very important day, which was the day that we had our brand new president-elect. And last year, I actually had planned a trip with my daughter, who's here, Chitra, to be in DC with the excitement that we were going to have our first female president-elect. We were finally going to break that ceiling glass, and so we planned a vacation of her lifetime, because it's her dream to be president. She's the politician in the family, you may believe it or not. So when we arrived, we had felt a sense of mourning the entire trip, the entire flight, the waiting time. But when we arrived, I remember this little girl looking up to me and asking me, "Mom, what are we going to do now that it's Trump who's president?" And for the first time, if you know me, I talk a lot. So for the first time, I was lost for words. And I remember looking at her with this uncertainty for our future, and I really didn't have an answer for her. her. And the one thing I said to her is, Chitra, when we get off this plane, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Washington Monument for inspiration, and then we're going straight to Trump Tower, and we're going to protest. And that's exactly what we did. You know, for 4 hours, we marched up and down D.C. With the first marches and protests against Trump. So I was devoted to, upon our return, to continue that type of engagement. The engagement that used to be there at some point, but there was times that I was organizing, and it was my daughter and I who were the protest line. It was my daughter and I who were knocking on doors. It was my daughter and I who were registering voters. It was my daughter and I who were doing visibility together and alone. But when I saw the engagement at the Women's March, I just knew that this was a magical moment, that we were going to be able to move forward together, unified. And so I asked you earlier tonight to join me in organizing. I asked you earlier tonight to join me in this fight to make sure that we can organize, unify, act, and we will win, because we can only do this together. I want to create a sense of strength within our district, a sense of pride, and we have to make sure that someone like McClintock doesn't have the right to represent us, because he doesn't speak for us, he doesn't even live here, and he's not one of us. And so the only thing that I can do is represent you and meet you halfway, because I will be your voice in Congress. I will amplify your concerns. So I hope that you'll join me. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Let's have a round of applause for all three candidates. Terrific forum tonight. Excellent candidates.
I would like to thank you again for coming out tonight. This has been a wonderful attended event. Don't forget to thank the volunteers with the badges that have been wandering the aisles and collecting the information. Do not forget to hand out your surveys. We will tally these surveys, including the information that we will receive online, and we will share with the candidates first the results of the survey, and then we will post the results on Facebook and our websites. This couldn't have been done without them, and I really want to thank the timekeeper. It was hard trying to find somebody here to do it, but Michael Akers kept him on too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to all involved in producing the event, the online portion of the event too, and Tom Sherry and Shelby Sweeney came here all the way from San Jose and donated their time and equipment to make this happen, and Gary Campbell from Channel 2, locally. Without them, it's really been online, and I know because of their efforts, the audience of this event was greatly increased. And I'd also like to thank the El Dorado Democrats for both their excellent collaboration and for funding this event, which, by the way, if you've seen the baskets going around, we appreciate your help in funding this event tonight, too. So thanks again, everybody, and thanks for coming out, and have a good night.